So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to you all to the Oak Room in the Mansion House. So, my name is Charles Duggan. I am the Heritage Officer here in Dublin City Council, and we're delighted that you're all able to come this evening for our lecture jointly presented by Dr. Rosaleen McDonagh and Séamus Nolan. So, this is the fourth in our lecture series, our public monthly lecture series. And through the series, which is part funded by the Heritage Council's County Heritage Plan Grant Scheme, we aim to showcase new books, research projects, and topics of importance relating to Dublin City. Our next talk at the end of the month, on the 29th of May, is by Kieran Owens, and it is entitled Once in a Lifetime, A Cultural Journey Through Dublin in the 70s, 80s and 90s, which was deferred from April. And then on the 19th of June, during Pride Month, Dr. Pádraig Kerrigan will give a talk on his new book, Reeling in the Queers, Tales of Ireland's LGBTQ Past, which will be launched also next month. So before introducing this evening's speakers, I would like to thank my colleague Abigail O'Reilly for her work in helping to organise this series, and to the staff here at the Mansion House, and of course to our sign language interpreters, Cormac Leonard and Aoife Harrington. So just to introduce our speakers. Dr. Rosaleen McDonagh is an author, a playwright, a feminist, a traveller and disability activist. She was appointed to the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission in 2020 and is a member of Éisteanna. Her first book, Unsettled, explores racism, ableism, abuse and resistance, as well as the bonds of community, family and friendship. Her plays include The Baby Doll Project, She's Not Mine, Rings, and The Prettiest Proud Boy and Mainstream. Some of her most recent commissions include Walls and Windows for the Abbey Theatre, Contentious Spaces for the Project Art Centre, and Night Shift for the Miss Lower Festival in Galway's Druid Theatre. She has written for the Irish Times and produced work for the RTE Radio and a forthcoming television series, as well as a new book in the pipeline and a second commission with the Abbey Theatre. Rosaleen will be speaking with Séamus Nolan this evening. Séamus is a visual artist, currently conducting his PhD with the School of Visual Culture in the National College of Art and Design and the School of Art History and Cultural Policy in UCD, in conjunction with the Collection Department of the Irish Museum of Modern Art, funded by the Irish Research Council. Recent work of his includes Herodotus, with Ciarda Sligo Arts Festival and the Sligo Traveller Support Group dating to 2023 and 2024. Séamus was curator in residence for Guides, an Arts Council collection exhibition in the Linen Hall Art Centre in Mayo in 2023. His work also includes the Traveller collection at the Hugh Lane Gallery, a collaboration with Pavey Point Traveller and Roma Centre in 2018, where he investigated the ideas of archive, deconstructing ideas of heritage and engaging with the travelling community in Ireland, and traveller activism and archivists. And in 2013, Séamus developed a project in the Temple Bar Gallery and Studios called 10th President, a campaign for the nomination of William Delaney, whose dates are 1957 to 1970, a child who died in St. Joseph's Industrial School in Letterfrack, aged 13, as a candidate for the 2018 Irish presidential election. So this evening, Rosaleen and Séamus will reflect upon the question of why it is necessary for artists, educators and activists to engage with traveller history, culture and social participation, to preserve some of the projects that have emerged and to ask what it is that non-travellers can do to support the enfranchisement of travellers and other marginalised groups. So I'd like to welcome Séamus to the podium, please.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks very much. That was a really good introduction. I was going to do an introduction, but now it's already been done. It's great to be here and to be able to discuss some of these projects, and for Rosaleen to be speaking as well. It's a real pleasure. So, as Charles said, I'm currently doing a PhD looking at travellers in contemporary art, and in doing so, it's kind of inevitably looking at traveller history and culture and cultural expression and how it's been represented and throughout Irish history. So there's, I'm sure I'll just give a basic outline. Irish travellers are indigenous minority, nomadic minority ethnicity in Ireland, and they represent about 7% of the total population. There's considerable literature documenting their forced assimilation from many writers and researchers and academics, including Sinead Ní Siúmhar, Aoife Ciara Brannock, Robbie McVeigh and Michael O'Haydon. And from within the community there's many writers and activists such as Rosaleen McDonagh and Cindy Joyce and Martin Collins and John Connors, who describe the lived experience of political oppression and social marginalisation. So I'm going to draw a little on those researchers and activists in what I do. But I just want to also declare that I'm not a traveller, and I'm not here to speak for travellers, and I'm also not here to interpret kind of traveller material or culture. As I've been developing my ethics forms for my PhD, one of the important elements is that I'm not here to cause any harm either, but I'm also possible for me to make mistakes and here to learn. So the projects I'm going to present and talk a little bit about are Traveller Collection at the Hugh Lane Gallery, which was a collaboration with Pave Point Traveller and Roma Centre, and that happened in 2018, and there was a sister project in the Hugh Lane called the Hugh Lane at Pave Point, and it was about material exchange between institutions and gathering different objects and archives. And so the second project is Guides, which was an Arts Council collection exhibition co-curated with community groups that included the Mayo Traveller Support Group in Castlebar, and then Hereditas, which is an ongoing project with Carja Arts Festival, and Sligo Traveller Support Group. And it's there's a project Standing Ground that I'd like to talk a little bit about. So it also happens that within those three projects, Rosaleen has been involved to a degree, along with other collaborators. And through Traveller Collection at the Hugh Lane, Rosaleen was commissioned to write a text based in a response to one of Yeats's paintings, "Oh, Had I the Wings of a Swallow," from 1925. And what Rosaleen raised at that time was the issue around the artist's identity as observers, and the kind of entangled contentions that legacies of misappropriation have engendered. So I suppose I wanted to just begin by describing why I started working in this area and with traveller communities. And so the bottom slide on the right is on the left is St Anthony's Park in Knocknaheeny in Cork, and that site was developed in 2015. It was developed after a long kind of lobbying for better services on a site that was managed by the council called Holly Hill, and previous to Holly Hill there was a traditional site that had existed there. I put in Apple Computers, which has their headquarters, the European headquarters in Knocknaheeny, and it was opened in 1980, and the redevelopment of the traveller site St Anthony's coincided with the extension of the Apple headquarters, and so Apple got permission to move on to expand onto the site that the Holly Hill site had been on, and I just wanted to include it because it coincides in terms of a sort of an investment in international kind of tech companies or economic development, and maybe a sort of a de-investment in social services. The site, St Anthony's, within 2 years has become the second most overcrowded halted site in Cork, with no provisions for cultural elements like horses or whatever. So the third image is from Misselin on the Tubber, which means travelling on the road, and it was a project conducted by Mags O'Sullivan in the Cork Traveller Women's Network, and she interviewed travellers elderly travellers in Cork, and located 24 different sites, and then they travelled to the sites and they collected soil and presented those as to honour those sites. So this kind of work was already happening in terms of like travellers trying to develop and mine their own histories around relationships to land, and so when I started doing this work, I began to look at the collections of archives that already exist, and there was some of the material like includes like on the left there's like from the reports, kind of statistical and government reports on the Commission on the Relief of Sick and Destitute Poor, including the insane poor. There's also really kind of important collections like the schools collection from the 1930s, which utilised a network of teachers in schools across the country. And the network was very much cross-gender, across the geographies, but not so much kind of cross-class, and it was like kids from rural Ireland who were invited to just look at, in their own communities, the different questions that they were asked around folklore and stuff, and observations around travellers. And that's a diagram of like a plunger and a tin can that is part of the collection, and it's a really great resource. And beside it, the Tinker's questionnaire, which at the time again utilised the resource of the collection network of volunteers primarily, and what it does is it really focus on the observation of travellers, and it kind of locates these routes across the country where travellers existed, and there's a lot of family names, but it doesn't necessarily go into the material and relationships that travellers maintain like towards those places or towards those objects. But they're really important kind of collections, and it's important that they exist. But more internal archives and collections, there's the Nan O'Donoghue, the autobiography or a biography co-authored with Sharon Gamelch. And Sharon Gamelch was an anthropologist, along with her husband, who spent a year in the Holy Lands, and they documented elements of traveller history and culture, and some of those have been refuted as well for maybe kind of a limited scope on actual traveller history, and as sort of a search in some ways for an origin as well that continued. So the next image is from the Pavey Point. It's like a scrapbook of 10 years from the 80s to the 90s, and the transition from Dublin. Sorry, I find it hard to read and talk. But it's like it's a collection of scrapbooks, and like the narratives are emerging from the community, and also in newspapers that are really important. Like you can see the apartheid Irish style, and traveller experience is being presented more in kind of popular media or whatever, and being played out, those relationships being played out in popular press. The bottom image is a collection of objects from the National Museum of Ireland, and it is consists of a number of like tin objects, porringers and budgets and tools, paper flowers, the kind of objects that existed to be traded or to be that were exchanged between travellers and non-travellers, or that were produced by travellers for settled community. So again, like in the National Museum, until recently, most of these objects were presented to the museum not through travellers, but through settled people and non-travellers, and they were also kind of subsumed into the broader collections. So just some examples of how external narratives have been written about. The Aileen La'Aim collection is a hugely important collection of the Travellers Resource Collection that was in University of Ulster. And Aileen La'Aim worked in the university, and she started collecting in the 80s. And she gathered information from journals, from novels, from folklore, songs. And she continued for almost 20 years. And the collection has been compiled into a series of volumes, from early history to education to reports. And when Sinead Ní Siúnmhar was editing the volume on early history, she described how much of the material from the early history is comprised of journals and amateur folklorists and novelists. But it was very hard to distinguish or draw a line between that material and then the maybe more serious or competent scientists who were ethnographers and who were examining and analysing kind of traveller history and culture. And the reason why it was so difficult is because the competent scientists, the material that they were looking at was from journalists and amateur folklorists. And again, it was observations of traveller culture as opposed to travellers describing or self-describing their own history and culture. So there's Una Crowley has also described this period in history in the mid-20th century, where she says traveller society was imagined and reconstructed during this period through elite discourse and the use of statistical inscriptions. How these mechanisms of representation facilitated and legitimated intervention into their everyday lives, rendering travellers visible and permitting their characterisation as a group, as a community in need of reform. So along with many kind of charity models that happened after the 1963 report on itinerancy and the founding of the itinerant settlement committees, there was travellers as a group became a particular. The narratives just maintained were towards the group as opposed to towards individuals, which is shifting somewhat. But I wanted to present some of the images as well that are in the Aileen La'Aim collection. And the Aileen La'Aim collection was digitised and is on the Traveller Collection website. But this image on the top left is called Irish Tinklers, and it's from 1907. And just the term tinklers is kind of interesting in the fact that tinkers was itself a term that was arrived at from outside of the community. And at that point it hadn't been fixed, or it was Sinead Ní Siúnmhar goes into the research around the etymology of the term, and the Gypsy Lore Society from the 1870s, I think it was. They put out a number of papers that were searching for the origin of gypsies and travellers, and the term tinker was applied to, first of all, Western European travellers, and then non-Romany travellers and travellers from the British Isles, and finally to Irish travellers. So in some ways, like it's an occupational descriptor, but also an ethnic descriptor. And the second image, the larger one on the right, is a picture from 1978, and I thought it was interesting to include it because it describes, first of all, an image of a family outside a bender tent, kind of a traditional tent structure with tarpaulin stretched over it. But it describes how, it's a bit out of focus, the Irish government have declared tarpaulin and canvas tents completely unfit for human habitation, and has prohibited their use. Such structures provide the only shelter for many impoverished tinker families, and not overwhelmingly suffer from respiratory illnesses. So again, just the group descriptors from outside of the community, and how travellers have been kind of affected, and the very fact that the material of their dwellings were prohibited. It's kind of apt at the moment. But on the left, in the bottom corner, there's the work of Derek Spears. And Derek is a photojournalist who has been documenting with travellers the history as it's unfurled over the last 30 or 40 years. And Derek insists on identifying everyone in the images that he takes, and second names, first names, and locations. And it's just, I find it really interesting, just this kind of group descriptors of travellers, that it's when somebody is actually working in the community, they know the importance of individual identity and diversity within the community as well, and diversity within family groups. Sorry. So when Traveller Collection happened, it was an exhibition in the Hugh Lane Gallery, and it comprised of a number of collections of material and objects, and the flowers that are strewn throughout the exhibition hall were made by women from the primary healthcare team in Pavey Point, and we did an interview as well with the women to document what those flowers meant and how they produced them, and the process of coming together and creating flowers, and the kind of economy that they had represented for when travellers were more nomadic. But the second image is from the Martin Folan collection, and it is images of Christina Lawrence, Martin Collins, and Mary McCann, and they were painted by Mick O'Dea. And the collection was borrowed from Pavey Point and presented in the Hugh Lane. And on the bottom, you can see on the left the digitisation of the Aileen Lane collection, which we borrowed from University of Ulster, and on the right, the roundtable discussion that happened in Pavey Point when we did borrow one piece of artwork from the Hugh Lane that was prohibited, that we could actually carry and have presented in the museum in the Pavey Point for the day. So Traveller Collection also involves a website, and the website contains links to numbers of archives and collections and material that's produced within the community and external to the community. And when you go onto the website, there's a description of how this collection includes descriptions and links to descriptions and representations of travellers that may be factually inaccurate, offensive, and otherwise inappropriate. And part of the work comprising this collection involves addressing discriminatory legacies, and we ask your help in identifying images or data that cause offence or harm. So, I mean, it's not that this work is about redressing, but it is about identifying and placing those objects together within this frame of traveller culture and material that's been collected around traveller culture. So, I mean, the ultimate goal of the website is for it to be managed and led by traveller participants, and we're currently working with Owen de Bardoon in the National Museum to support that. But the collection, I think, it's sort of how you build archives and how you address the problematics of archives has been something that's it's tied up with colonial legacies and museological issues. And Stuart Hall, as a British cultural theorist with Caribbean heritage, he proposed the archive of the living archive of the diaspora, which again tries to address some of these issues around how heritage and archives are constantly in dialogue with the present and with the past, and how the past constantly shifts and each generation asks those questions differently. Stuart Hall maintains that the archive has to be rich, varied, and in a sense eclectic enough to bear the weight of different contested interpretations and to allow them to battle out their differences in relation to the different texts and intertexts which the archive itself makes. So this is some of the artworks that were in the Arts Council's collection, and I was invited to curate it for the Linden Hall Arts Centre. And the Travellers Support Group in Mayo, the first request that they had was that they only wanted to look at images that were by travellers in the Arts Council's collection, which there was one image, and it was very recent from 2017. So we also talked to them about other images that were about travellers and how they might be included or how they might be kind of interpreted by the community themselves. So one of the images, I remember when we showed Some Heroes Are Sold, Some Are Sold Out by Charlie O'Neill, and the centre image is a photograph by Derek Spears of I think it's Bell Camp back in the 80s, and there was a kind of a debate among the group around displaying poverty. One of the women, she felt it was, you wouldn't show these images anymore, that the connotations of poverty and dumps and stuff had been hard fought to be removed by the community, whereas some of the other women felt that these were honest people who that was their living situation, and that there was no shame in showing that situation. So bringing together those images, those artworks, we invited Rosaleen to come and speak with the group and to kind of examine those artworks together. And Rosaleen produced a text based on the conversations with the group, and there was also a further artwork by Maud Cotter called Not the Full Story, which is a number of Delft works that were remade for the exhibition. And so I'm not sure if Rosaleen is going to speak about any of this, but just to acknowledge that I think like the work of looking at those kind of archives has to involve traveller interpretation, and it has to involve that kind of engagement at all levels of how the exhibitions are produced and that material is examined. So another project previous to that, I was invited by Dublin City Council, Dublin City Council Cultural Company, to work with a group of young men in Pave Point who were conducting a history project. And so I came along, and they also worked with a genealogist, and the final family tree that was produced was submitted to the National Library, and it was the first item that had been submitted by travellers to the National Library, and this was 2019. But the part that we worked on was identifying sites around Offaly where some of the families had stayed and had relationships with, they had lived there, and so we brought down some of the older people and the younger people from the community. Without a map, we found all these locations and discussed them, and we mapped them, and they ended up creating a story map, and the project went on to be run by the Maynooth, the geography department in Maynooth, and to map Coolock afterwards, and sites of belonging related to travellers who have settled or are settled in Coolock. So the project in Sligo from 2023 is called Standing Ground, and in that we conducted loads of oral histories research with the community in Sligo, and identified a number of sites through folklore collection, through military history archives, with the community themselves, and presented a touchscreen map that creates an archive of those locations and the documentation of those locations. And then throughout the city, or throughout the town of Sligo, we put up these banners with images from the newspaper archives and with oral history accounts. And the final map is permanently installed in the Sligo Traveller Support Group's office, which is open to the public. So I also wanted to show, just in terms of the kind of work that does happen and has been happening with travellers, like in Bray, the commemoration of the area of the Blind Lake, which the Bray Traveller Development Group have put a monument to commemorate the travellers who stayed there for a significant time. And there's also, like Cindy Joyce talked about, that, you know, following kind of Irish independence, the kind of relationships between the state and travellers shifted a huge degree, and a lot of the sites that travellers would have camped on became prime real estate for developing social housing in a lot of instances, but also industry. And so there was the disputes between travellers and settled people around land usage became kind of the dominant narrative that was presented. But since even in the many reports, they talk about the necessity for building a kind of a national mapping exercise to support nomadic cultures. Like the Irish Travellers movement have been calling for a national mapping exercise for a number of years. And some of the monuments that do exist across the country, the Gable Monument that's up in Donegal is a commemoration of Mickey Doherty, who was a fiddler. He was out one night on the roads, and he missed the curfew and heard the Black and Tans coming behind him, so he hid down in the dike. But they seen him, and he had to prove that he was a traveller, that he was a tinsmith, in order for him to let it go. So he pulled out his tools and he produced a plunger. So that monument commemorates that site. And there's the top image is Take Away the Stone by Martin Folan, who went along with the Traveller National Pilgrimages, and he brought his fiberglass boulder. He wheeled it along on the pilgrimage with his daughter, and Martin also produced the Martin Folan collection in Pavey Point. And then there's the Three Warriors, which is on the top right, and it was a sculpture produced through St. Mel's Traveller Training Centre in Longford. And it was about the different ethnic makeup of Ireland and Irish people, and it's currently in need of a bit of maintenance, and it's kind of been subsumed back into the roundabout. It's sort of disappearing, but it's I just think it's a really interesting place for the young travellers to kind of present this notion of ethnicity and how important it was to be part of an Irish ethnicity and the makeup of it. And then the bottom image is the Travart, which was an organisation in Letterkenny made up of travellers who created different sculptures, public sculptures and artworks. So this idea of remembrance and commemoration, which is important in all societies, I think it's become really essential that the cultural forms within each community kind of present or are presented. So this is what was launched last week, the Mincarry Archive, and Owen de Bardoon in the National Museum. He has put this together with a number of travellers from the who hold history, and it's based on oral histories of we've got Christy Donoghue Ward, Martin Ward, Nell McDonagh, John Monaghan, Mary Moriarty Ward, Mike Mongan, Owen Ward, Paddy Quilligan, Thomas McCann and Tom McDonald. And it focuses on traveller cultural forms of oral documentation for the keepers of traveller history to share their experience and knowledge. And it's such a rich project coming directly from the community as well. So I think I'm finished there, and I'm going to hand over to Rosaleen if you want to speak about those projects or
It's rare that I get an accident that I can see you and you can see me. How long do I have?
As long as you like.
Well, I hope I don't put you to sleep. First of all, thank you, Séamus. Another round of applause. I think it's really telling of the integrity of the man by saying, I'm not a traveller. And because there was a time very recently when settled people would talk about them without identifying their own ethnicity. Before I start, I want to thank Charles Duggan. You still owe me a copy from COVID. I want to talk about 4 topics, and I need someone to hold me account. So Séamus, if you sit over here in my eye line, and you can remind me, my 4 topics are about the delicate dance of collaboration, the loss of artifacts, the importance of cultural revival, and how that should be resourced. And I had a 4th one, and true oral tradition is gone out of my mind, but I'll make it up as I go along. Just as a point of clarification, I'm not settled. There isn't a drop of settled blood in my genealogy. I'm not here to reprimand or criticise, but I'm here to witness a shift in our revival, in our cultural revival, and in our history, and also to pay homage to our forebears, travellers, whose art and artefacts were lost, disregarded, and misappropriated. We're now in a much stronger position. Activism attempts to agitate for social change. And within that social change, art becomes part of the toolbox. And I suppose as a playwright, I would see myself as bearing witness to contemporary elements of traveller culture and heritage, and making sure that our work, not just my work, but our work as a collective, gets recognised, valued, resourced, and that when a community, when our rights have been evoked, we lose everything. You lose your identity. You lose your self-esteem. And often you forget to value the richness and knowledge within your own culture. And sometimes, I remember as a child, settled people would find all this very interesting. And I'd be thinking, but this is just us. This is our way of being in the world. And that curious lens probably has widened a bit, and people have been told, you use it as a settled lens to narrate what you think is our material narrative. What was my second point? You're all asleep. It's late in the day. But I suppose collaboration is a difficult one. Because on the one hand you're propagating self-determination and the right to own your own work, the right to own our own artifacts, and the right to create our own place in museums and art galleries and history. And at the same time, if you have lost or have had your material, intellectual, artistic, and cultural wealth stolen, it's very hard to go back and build that work up again. So I suppose I can only talk about my relationship with Séamus, a visual artist, and me as a writer. It has been difficult. I'm sure you would agree there are moments when you challenge me, and moments when I would say, hang on, I don't need another settled person coming in, taking over, telling me how I should be. So that collaboration took time. We had to suss each other out. we had to figure out if we're not able to do the work, who else is? And how do we stop the cycle of dependency? And those conversations are really difficult to engage on an artistic level or indeed an emotional level between me and Séamus. And it was really hard. There were moments, one particular moment, we went for a drive and went down to Kilkenny, where Séamus is from, and he showed me where he lived. And I said, Séamus, I have no physical house to show you. I can show you where I think our trailer was, or the site that we lived in. My currency as a traveller in this relationship isn't what yours is. And we thought a lot about that, but those difficult moments helped us refine the work we wanted to do. And I want to write, and I'm not an archivist. I'm not a history student. But what I am is an agitator, I hope. And while I've experienced racism, sometimes during those conversations with Séamus, and I'm sure you've had them with other travellers, where shifting the ground of power and power dynamics happens in a very natural way. You know, and that said, I think Séamus, just like Derek Spears, has managed to elevate and empower travellers like us to say to the national heritage, to say, look, it's worth your while listening to us, it's worth your while investing in us, and maybe at some stage you might consider a monument other than Paddy Doherty that had to kind of produce his work tools to validate his ethnicity. I also think, a bit like Lady Gregory or Lady G, as we like to call her, this is our moment as travellers in terms of taking our space, not as objects, but as subjects within the art and cultural infrastructure in mainstream Ireland. And we come in terms of not by way of assimilation, but by way of pride and ownership of our own artifacts and our own journey around those pictures that Yeats and none of us, but a lot of us, history and historical language, like to tinker invokes a real sense of rage and anger. And not every traveller, but some of us, I know I found it very difficult to get past or to work with or to engage. And I remember in my own journey during my PhD, I was expected to read tomes of literature that high, and about 100 rows by settled people questioning our ethnicity as a form of a settled academic exercise. And I suppose, well, I don't suppose, I believe travellers, we as a community, are now in a position where we have the capacity to narrate and create our own work. And the role of the settled narrator is becoming more clearly defined, and that the road of collaboration, whether that's a collaboration with people like Séamus Nolan or the state, that there's clear guidelines and ethics of how we do this, and the ownership of art and our artifacts, whether they be music, drama, sculpture, tinsmith, and people will know that they're travellers. And also I think to Charles, if I can be so bold, while I understand it's not in your gift to give us a monument of travel, but I do think that there's a precedent in terms of Aboriginal people and the Maori people that they, like us, are in a constant kind of agitated state with similar bodies as yours. I think I might leave it. I think I'm rambling on and I'm unfocused, and it's been a long day. But before I go, I would say again, I've been enriched and empowered by my friendship with Séamus, my collaboration. I live within 5 minutes of the Human Gallery. I'm a middle-aged woman. Until I met Séamus, I never had the confidence to go into the gallery. I felt it wasn't a place that was for me. It wasn't a place that reflected my people. And it was Séamus' patience and encouragement that you have to go in, you have to explore, you have to find yourselves in the pages or in the artworks that settled people have used. And anyway, thank you, Séamus.